Today, the Obama administration is in court asking a panel of judges to reject South Carolina's photo ID law. The Justice Department argues that it will likely disenfranchise minority voters by significant numbers. In recent years, Republican governors in 10 states have enacted laws requiring voters to show ID before casting their vote. Republicans argue that they're just trying to root out voter fraud. But the idea that ineligible voters are swinging elections is pure fantasy. According to NYU's Brennan Center for Justice, Americans are more likely to get struck by lightning than to encounter voter fraud. So what exactly is the purpose of voter ID laws? More than anything, these laws help keep certain sectors of the electorate from exercising their constitutional right to vote. And in turn, this helps Republicans win elections. The Republican leader of the Pennsylvania House said as much earlier this summer.
Voter ID, which is going to allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania, done.
Voter ID isn't the only tool Republicans are using. In the swing states of Florida and Ohio, Republicans are taking aim at early voting hours, which helped President Obama win in 2008. According to one Ohio Republican official, quote, "I guess I really actually feel we shouldn't contort the voting process to accommodate the urban, read African-American, voter turnout machine." Ironic? Perhaps. These days, contorting, altering, curtailing, and otherwise complicating the voting process has very nearly become a Republican Party platform. In fact, at last week's GOP Platform Committee meeting, Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach drafted an amendment supporting voter ID laws. It reportedly made it onto the GOP platform. We reached out to the RNC for confirmation, but have not received a response. Joining us now is former Democratic Congressman from Pennsylvania, Joe Sestak, and here in New York, the nation's Ari Berman. Congressman Sestak, I'd like to go to you first on this. Knowing well as you do the Keystone State, what sort of impact do you foresee these laws having in critical swing states?
Well, we're not going to be able to judge that because already there are people who feel they cannot come out to vote, and we won't know what the reason is. Even today, Pennsylvania just announced another change of a dozen changes since the law was signed just 5 months ago. I, for example, as a military guy, under the first way the law was passed, couldn't even use my military ID card because it had the word indefinite under the date. I think the bigger issue here, Alex, is that, you know, in the military, every single division on every ship for a year before an election has an officer who goes around to every member of each of the divisions and says, here's your absentee ballot, how about filling it out? To where we understand the value of protecting the right to vote. Unfortunately, here in this great commonwealth, we've become the Keystone Cops rather than the Keystone State, to where we want to put the citizen above party. We have a governor, for example, who for 8 years as Attorney General could not find one case of voter fraud to prosecute. And yet, instead of focusing on jobs, has decided that his priority had to be to disenfranchise voters. I would be for this end to have a voter ID card if you took the time and not have a means that prostitutes the process and gives a number of years to make sure that it can be implemented well. But that's not the case, and nor do we have any cases of any voter ID that the state of Commonwealth could bring up in court last month to try to present to the Commonwealth Court judge.
Ari, you've done some great and extensive reporting on this subject, in particular the congressman using some very strong language there, prostituting the state. We know that this is a problem. We've acknowledged it on this channel, on this air before. The president's team is taking it very seriously. They are fighting measures that are voter ID measures that are happening in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Florida, and Ohio. They know that this is going to matter. Could it turn the election?
It could. I mean, you look, this has been one of the most significant changes since the 2010 election, is the wholesale change in voting laws across the country. More than a dozen states have changed their voting laws to make it harder for Obama's base to vote. You look at all the different voting changes, whether it's making it harder to register to vote, cutting back on early voting, passing voter ID laws, disenfranchising ex-felons, purging voters. They're all aimed at making it harder for Obama's core coalition to be able to turn out. And there really was no problem of voter fraud in 2008 or in any previous elections that necessitated these kind of laws. What necessitated these kind of laws from the Republican Party's perspective was the election of Barack Obama, and the fact that, as you mentioned in earlier segments, the country was changing, becoming more diverse. And rather than courting those voters, the GOP has decided, let's just make it harder for them to vote in the next election.
I mean, Howard, not to get grandiose about this, but to get a little grandiose about this, this is beyond just ensuring that the president isn't reelected. I mean, this is disenfranchising hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of minority voters. That quote, "It's not my job to worry about African-American turnout." Well, as an elected representative, your job should be worrying and making it easier for people to vote, to exercise a constitutional right.
Look, it is not easy to vote in this country compared with many other countries around the world. The Republicans are clearly making it more difficult. At the end of the day, the bottom line is there's one party that is trying to make it easier for people to vote in this country. This is the Democratic Party. There's another party that's trying to make it more difficult for people to vote, and that's the Republican Party. That's a set of facts. I mean, the Republicans, will try to pretend that isn't so, that this is about the law and enforcing the law. But, I think as we are seeing in many cases, this is about suppressing President Obama's base.
And they are now theoretically writing it into the Republican Party platform, which they will be touting this week. We'll have more on this after the break. It's not exactly coincidence that many of these voter ID battles are fought in critical toss-up states like Pennsylvania and Ohio. Each one has its own special brand of subversion. We will look at the states of disgrace in particular next.
Your face on a football field and a kiss.
We're sitting on a bunch of shale gas.
There's natural gas under my town.
It's a game changer. It means cleaner, cheaper, American-made energy.
But we've got to be careful how we get it. Design the wells to be safe.
Thousands of jobs.
Use the most advanced technology to protect our water.
Billions in the economy.
At Chevron, if we can't do it right, we won't do it at all. We've got to think long term.
I'm only in my 60s. I've got a nice long life ahead, big plans. So when I found out Medicare doesn't pay all my medical expenses, I looked at my options. Then I got a Medicare supplement insurance plan.
If you're eligible for Medicare, you may know it only covers about 80% of your Part B medical expenses. The rest is up to you. Call now and find out about an AARP Medicare supplement insurance plan insured by United Healthcare Insurance Company. Like all standardized Medicare supplement plans, it helps pick up some of what Medicare doesn't pay and could save you thousands in out-of-pocket costs.
To me, relationships matter. I've been with my doctor for 12 years. Now I know I'll be able to stick with them.
With these types of plans, you'll be able to visit any doctor or hospital that accepts Medicare patients. Plus, there are no networks, and you never need a referral to see a specialist. So don't wait. Call now and request this free decision guide to help you better understand Medicare and which AARP Medicare supplement plan might be best for you. There's a wide range to choose from.
We love to travel, and there's so much more to see. So we found a plan that can travel with us anywhere in the country.
Join the millions of people who have already enrolled in the only Medicare supplement insurance plans endorsed by AARP, an organization serving the needs of people 50 and over for generations. Remember, all Medicare supplement insurance plans help cover what Medicare doesn't pay and could save you thousands a year in out-of-pocket costs. Call now to request your free decision guide and learn more about the kinds of plans that will be here for you now and down the road.
I have a lifetime of experience, so I know how important that is.
According to NYU's Brennan Center for Justice, since last year, Republicans in 19 states have enacted laws aimed at rolling back voting rights. Those laws include high-profile voter ID laws in Texas, South Carolina, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, all of which are the subject of legal fights. And in Ohio and Florida, Republicans have pushed through changes that slash the number of days and hours allowed for early voting. Congressman Sestak, in Pennsylvania in particular, I thought this was staggering. 9.2% of registered voters in Pennsylvania lack state-issued voter ID. ID.
That's
18% in Pennsylvania, which is 44% black. I mean, to say that this is not disproportionately targeting minorities is shocking. In Florida and Duval County on the Sunday before the 2008 election, 43% of early votes came from African Americans. This is a major issue, and it trends just exactly along racial lines.
I think that's exactly why the Department of Justice has rightly asked the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to reveal some of the data by which it made its decision. This is going to impact those that tend to be old, tend to be disabled, tend to be poor, and the minorities. And I think that's the shame of what's happened here. Even the Commonwealth judge, who said just a few weeks ago, in supporting the state law, he said that, well, somewhere between 1% to 9% of people are going to be impacted by that. 1% is 80,000 people alone. 9% is 80,000 people, 800,000. This is, without a question, going to go against those that the law must most protect. I can tell you one example of a veteran in my district who is old, disabled, fought in a war, blind. And because he, as a child, then was adopted by his stepfather, he had his birth certificate changed. And until today, where they just changed the law one more time, he was unable in time to get the right data in order to go forward and vote. That's the shame about all this.
Well, Ari, when you hear those stories, I mean, there's so many anecdotes about people who have voted for years, decades, who understand it to be their constitutional right, and then all of a sudden the rules change. I thought in Ohio, the fact that now early voting is being changed. It used to be 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. for certain weeks before the election. Now it's 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. I mean, there's just no logic here in terms of cutting back on days and hours of voting.
No, the only logic is to make it harder for Democrats to vote. I mean, that is the over-encompassing logic that gets at all these different pieces of legislation. I mean, the thing is, it's just so confusing for voters now. You have in Pennsylvania, we're 2 months out from the election, and somewhere between 80,000 and 100,000 registered voters might not be able to vote. I mean, that's crazy. You look at Ohio. Every week, the voting hours change. You look at Florida, the voter registration rules, it's one rule, then it's another rule. And so beyond the fact that we are suppressing voters, we're just also confusing them unnecessarily. And I think it's going to be an absolute mess on Election Day.
And not just confusing them, but also scaring them. We found, I was in 2004, I worked for the DNC, we worked on this issue. We did focus groups. We found that a discussion of how difficult it was to vote actually scared voters away from the polls. They just sort of said, you know, it's going to be a hassle. Somebody's going to want to look at my ID and my documentation. I just don't want to deal with it. I'll stay home. I won't bother. So even the very discussion of this discourages voting.
Absolutely. 220 years here in Pennsylvania, where the Constitution was founded, giving the right to vote, where that right to vote is mentioned 4 times in the Constitution, and yet freedom of the press and freedom of religion is only mentioned once. Somehow, our Commonwealth state has decided party is more important than citizen. That's what's outrageous about this, is you're supposed to, as a public servant, put your party underneath the citizen, and that's what's not happened here.
Congressman Joe Sestak, thank you so much for your time, sir. We will, of course, be monitoring